Greetings and welcome back to yet another episode of the Daily Run, as today we're playing as Samson. So today we're going to the cathedral, at least we're going to the void, or I would say we're trying to go to the void, and if that doesn't work out then we're going to the dark room, and if there's no sacrifice room then we're going to the cathedral. So really when you think about it, the goal that's posted when you start a daily isn't really the one that you're usually gonna go to, so what's even the point of a daily goal anymore? I feel like it did lose its meaning. I decided to have, I would say, a bit of a more of an impact to see where you were actually going, but today a lot of the things are just the same. Back in the day when we were just playing Afterbirth Plus, I think that the biggest goal there was of course going to the dark room, but that wasn't really possible a lot, and of course people were still kind of learning your strategy and the ropes of trying to maximize whatever it's worth going to the dark room or not, and sometimes it wasn't, sometimes it was, but with addition of the void floor, I feel like a lot of that was kind of taken out of the equation, just mainly because the void floor can spawn the dark room, which I think made the decision making a little bit easier in cases like this one. So really what ends up happening is, even though you have two different daily goals, or at least I would say four in some cases, you still end up going to the same finish line just because there's really no other more optimal way to do it. But okay, we all know that there are problems with the daily system, we all know that that is going on, but maybe what is more important than that? Well, I think Magic Mush is more important than that, and that's exactly what we picked up. But also we have a guppy item, and we also have, I would say, the potato peeler, and of course I used it 4 times, or at least 3 times, and I had one of the other cube of meats, and I managed to get a super meat boy, and I used it, I mean, in the majority of cases I wouldn't really recommend doing this because I feel like having a super meat boy is not really going to be worth it. I would much rather have an orbital, but sometimes I feel like you have to rely on your familiars to help you out, and especially if you manage to get it early enough, I feel like it can make a big enough of an impact for you to actually warrant picking it up. And since I had enough health at that point to afford it, I just figured why not. I'm just gonna be a little bit silly, and it's nice to have this happy goofy guy just kind of walking around running into enemies. Sure, you know, maybe he doesn't deal as much damage as you would maybe hope he does. He's still, I would say, a very welcome addition, especially on a floor like this one where you really can't see what's going on. And he kind of just goes around in the dark and helps you get rid of those enemies, especially those who are maybe a little bit more stationary than most, so he can really just kind of hug on them and just deal a lot of damage. So for example, enemies like Mega Maw, or even in this case Mega Fatty, he just really does do a lot of damage against them, so I just felt a little bit safer having him with me. One thing that happened was Polycephalus, and it's one of those bosses which I'm never really too fond of fighting, but there's this one particular room that we had on this daily, which I would say was a bit unfortunate, because you really can't avoid a lot of his shots, or maybe you can, I just don't really know how to, because I haven't fought him in that room very often. But essentially, every time he hits you, he actually deals 1 full heart of damage, which is something I actually didn't realize before. And the problem is, because you're in that small room, you actually can't really predict when he's gonna pop out. And when he does, it usually comes as a bit of a surprise. So really, how can you go against that? And because it's a run like this one, where we actually did have a lot of health and a lot of spirit hearts, I can imagine in a run which maybe didn't have as much, I would say, resources, this would definitely be or spell trouble, and I would be in a much worse spot for just actually getting in there. Talking about unnecessary damage, I feel like there were a lot of instances in this particular run where I took damage that I really shouldn't have, and if you're kind of paying attention, the very first and the second floor, I think I took like 6 hits of damage in total, which admittedly like isn't a huge amount. That's only like 3 full hearts, which is definitely a negligible, not a negligible amount, but it's not, I would say, a big amount of damage. Usually expect to get hit, like, I would say, for 10 full hearts of damage on an average run that's going to the void. And of course, that's just because there are a lot of rooms which maybe you really can't avoid damage, or maybe you have a particular run which makes it very unwieldy against certain enemies, and sometimes, you know, you just play a little bit dumb, you walk into a spike or whatever, and of course, whenever you do that, that costs you 2 hits of damage, and not just 1, because it takes 1 full heart away whenever that happens. But obviously, in a situation like this one, I actually did take quite a bit of damage in the first and the second floor, but luckily the run was kind enough to reward us with some spirit hearts and of course just some health, so we could actually get through it without too much trouble. But it's always very discouraging when I start a run and I feel like I'm trying to do my best, but somehow I just keep getting hit. I think a lot of that was obviously due to me having cube of meat and just trying to find mouse throw, and the problem was I try to get in there close and personal and just do a lot of damage with my cube of meat, and sometimes I have a really hard time judging where I would say that, not that perception, but where the hitboxes are. So he ends up jumping and maybe avoid like half of a second too late, and he somehow ends up jumping into me. And I take a bit of damage, which is obviously unprecedented, but also very, very much my own fault. So really, I don't know what I could have done other than just playing a little bit safer. But another thing to realize is the reason why I even was in that position is because I was playing relatively slowly, or at least I felt like the very first floor was quite long, so I was trying to kind of speed up the process a little bit, and I feel like the best way to do that, if you have the cube of meat, is to really get close and personal and just try to do a lot of work that way. So with the way things turned out, it wasn't that big of a deal because like a set 3 hits a full hard damage is not that big, and I definitely don't consider it substantial, but if it was a different run where maybe we didn't have enough health, and maybe if he fought polycephalus on another floor, that could have spelled doom for us, and in that situation I would have been in trouble. But luckily in this one, everything did turn out to be fine. As the run was kind of progressing here, we actually got a lot of really good items that kind of, I would say, boosted the power of a run. Not only did we get Eve's Mascara, which in a lot of cases I would say is not very good, but in this one it was actually pretty decent because we had a lot of tier delay upgrades, and we even got more later on. So basically, if you can double your damage and still kind of warrant having like 10 tier delay at this point, you're really, I would say, increasing your overall DPS, but obviously the potential is there because every time you get a fly, it's also going to be doing more damage, and also overall being a 10 tier delay is not that, I would say, detrimental, because whenever you do get a tier delay upgrade later on, it will actually have an effect as opposed to just being stuck at a soft cap of 5. So just in that sense, in this particular run, the Eve's Mascara was good. And because it's such a substantial damage upgrade, it kind of complemented well the other ones. For example, like the Mark and the Halo, which usually aren't that big of a deal because Eve's Mascara actually gives you a 2 damage multiplier. Both of those items become much better than basically any of the other counterparts. But later on, we also get items like the Pentagram, I think, and later on we turn into Guppies. So all of those items actually kind of pay out to be just amazingly decent in all regards. And in this particular case, I feel like that's really what they carried the run. Like, this was the identity of this run. It was very damaging shots, a shot at a relatively high speed with Meat Boy, and of course we had penetrative shots, but maybe our tier delay wasn't the best. So sometimes I would say this feels a little bit more satisfying because you have to aim your shots a little bit more, and whenever they do hit, they actually do deal quite a significant amount of damage. So just in that satisfactory factor, I would say this is definitely a more enjoyable run than most, and it was obviously very strong. Being at 25 damage at this point is something not to be joked about, and it definitely felt really good to just get in there close and personal. I think the only problem here is our low shot speed, which means we don't have enough range, so we had to be kind of close to a lot of enemies, which means of course we can't utilize our lump of coal, but also we're just much more likely to actually get hit. But as we're going to the void here, of course, I had the Tarot Cloth, I got a bunch of cards, and at a certain point I used my 2 of spades and also used my 2 of clubs. So I actually was at 99 of every single consumable in the end. So my Shrek bonus was actually pretty decent, and I feel like that's exactly what put me over the edge. I would say the Shrek bonus that I got by using these cards and by having Tarot Cloth definitely offsets the fact that I took so much damage early on, of course later on as well, but it's kind of complementary. I would say the 2000 damage penalty could have been easily avoided in this particular case, and obviously a little bit more if I was better at the game, but I would say that for my standards, I think like an additional 2000 points could have been easily gained if I were just playing a little bit more carefully. But of course, the run is still here. I did try my best. I think I got to the end, and you know, in the end, it was an enjoyable run, and I think that's really what matters the most. So with that said, I hope you enjoyed this one, guys, and I hope to see you next time.